Escort her out. Now.
Rose was being thrown out.
Do not let her speak to the bride.
Grant wanted her silenced. Maya saw everything.
Aunt Rose! What is happening?
Give me the box, and this ends quietly.
The box terrified him.
Let her go.
Do not sign anything. You need to hear the truth. That man is lying to you, Maya. Your grandmother knew exactly who you would become.
Security will handle her.
His mother helped hide it.
Tell me the truth.
His grandmother left this for you. The twin sharks.
16 months earlier, it all seemed impossible. At 31, Maya had built a life that looked ordinary from the outside and meaningful to anyone who knew her. She taught at a public school on the east side of Briarwood, where she worked with children whose families had learned to measure time in appointments, bus schedules, and insurance denials. Her classroom was full of picture cards, weighted blankets, chipped tables, and little victories that never made the news. Maya knew the names of every child who hated loud rooms, every parent who had learned to apologize for arriving late, and every student who had been told, directly or indirectly, that their needs were too expensive. She had not grown up with much. Her mother, Lila, had been a reading specialist who believed that every child deserved at least one adult who saw potential before behavior. When Lila died suddenly after a brief illness, Maya was 14. Rose, Lila's older sister, had taken her in without speeches or conditions. Rose had worked night shifts as a home care nurse then, and money was always tight. But Maya never remembered feeling unwanted. She remembered packed lunches, secondhand books, birthday cakes that leaned to one side, and a woman who would stay awake until dawn after a double shift just to make sure Maya had finished her homework. Rose never pretended their life was glamorous. She taught Maya how to repair a hem, how to stretch soup across 3 dinners, how to recognize when someone was treating kindness as weakness. There was one lesson, however, that Maya had never fully understood. Rose believed that the people most eager to be admired were often the people least willing to be known. Maya used to think it was simply the wisdom of someone who had spent decades in strangers' homes, watching families perform love for visitors and abandon it when the doors closed. Then Grant Holloway arrived at her school with a camera crew, a group of foundation staff, and a donation large enough to replace the classroom equipment Maya had spent years begging the district to approve. The Holloway Foundation had been a familiar name in Briarwood for as long as Maya could remember. It funded scholarships, literacy centers, hospital wings, and polished advertisements about lifting communities through opportunity. Its founder, Eleanor Holloway, had been remembered as a stern but generous woman who turned a small family business into a philanthropic empire. After Eleanor's death, the foundation passed into the hands of her daughter, Catherine, and her grandson, Grant. They appeared in magazines, stood beside oversized checks, and spoke often about legacy. Grant entered Maya's classroom in a tailored suit that did not quite belong among finger paint and sensory toys. Yet he seemed to know exactly how to make himself fit. He knelt beside a student who had trouble making eye contact. He listened while Maya explained why a new communications device could change a child's day. He asked questions that made her believe he had actually read the proposal rather than simply approved it. By the end of the visit, he had promised not only the devices, but a small grant for teacher training across the district. Maya was careful at first. She had seen wealthy people arrive with announcements and leave before the real work began. But Grant kept returning. He attended school board meetings. He remembered the names of students. He sent handwritten notes after difficult weeks. And when he asked Maya to dinner, he did it without making her feel like a charitable project he had decided to rescue. Their relationship moved quickly, though not carelessly. Grant took Maya to quiet restaurants rather than the places reporters followed him. He listened when she talked about her students, even when the stories had no easy ending. He seemed to admire that she did not chase his money or his family name. In fact, he often said that being with her felt like stepping outside the world that expected something from him every minute of the day. Rose did not share Maya's confidence. She was polite to Grant, never openly hostile, but she watched him in a way that made him uncomfortable. She noticed how his generosity increased when a camera was nearby. She noticed that he asked Maya to send photographs whenever a new device arrived at school, then later claimed those photographs had inspired the Foundation's latest campaign. She noticed the small pauses in his expression when Maya disagreed with him, the faint tightening around his mouth when anyone failed to admire him quickly enough. Still, Rose said little. Maya had spent most of her life being underestimated because of where she came from. Rose did not want to become another person, telling her that happiness was too fragile for someone like them to trust. So she kept her concerns to herself, hoping she was wrong. For a while, it seemed she might be. Grant proposed on a winter evening beneath the lights of a small botanical garden that had been closed to the public for the night. There were no journalists, no celebrity friends, no branded banners. Maya believed that was proof the moment belonged only to them. When she said yes, Grant held her as though he had been waiting his whole life for someone who did not care about the Holloway name. The engagement changed the temperature around them almost immediately. Catherine Holloway began appearing more often, always elegant, always measured, always able to make a criticism sound like concern. She offered to manage the wedding because, as she gently suggested, a marriage into the Holloway family attracted attention, and attention required care. She selected the chapel, the guest list, the flowers, the menus, and eventually most of the people allowed to have an opinion. At first, Maya accepted this as generosity. She had never planned a wedding and did not want to be ungrateful. But Catherine's help came with a quiet process of removal. Maya's co-workers were shifted to a distant table because the room was limited. Rose was advised that a smaller family dinner before the ceremony might be more comfortable than the main reception. A photo of Maya's mother, which Maya wanted near the ceremony flowers, was described as too personal for the visual plan. Each decision seemed minor by itself. Together, they made Maya feel less like a bride and more like a detail being arranged. Grant always found a way to smooth it over. He told Maya his mother had spent her life managing public attention and did not know how to stop. He promised that once the wedding was over, they would build a life with fewer expectations and more space. Maya wanted to believe him. Every time doubt appeared, she reminded herself of the man who had sat on the floor of her classroom and listened to a child struggle to form one sentence. Rose, however, recognized something Maya did not. She had seen Catherine Holloway before, though Maya had never known it. Nearly 20 years earlier, Rose had worked as a private nurse for Eleanor Holloway during the final season of Eleanor's life. By then, Eleanor was no longer the towering public figure people admired from newspaper photographs. She was ill, exhausted, and increasingly troubled by things happening inside the Foundation that carried her name. Rose had been hired because Eleanor wanted someone outside the family. She had told the agency that she needed a nurse who could be trusted not to confuse employment with loyalty to Catherine or Grant. Rose had not understood the significance of that request until the nights when Eleanor could not sleep. On those nights, the old woman spoke less about death than betrayal. She had built the Holloway Foundation to keep children from being discarded by systems that found them inconvenient. Yet she had begun to suspect that her own family was using the foundation as a stage set, moving money through polished programs while the people in greatest need were removed from the picture. Eleanor never gave Rose every detail. She was too careful for that. But she did ask Rose to keep a cedar box hidden where Catherine would never think to look. She told her that the box contained what mattered if the family ever tried to turn compassion into a costume. Rose had promised without understanding how expensive that promise would become. After Eleanor died, Catherine claimed that the final estate documents had been settled. The foundation continued, and Grant grew into its public face. Rose received no invitation to the funeral reception. She kept the box in the back of a linen cabinet for years, telling herself that perhaps the danger Eleanor feared had passed. Then Grant began dating Maya. The first warning came 6 weeks before the wedding, when Rose visited Maya's apartment and found a stack of documents waiting to be signed. Maya had been told they were standard papers connected to her future role at the foundation. Grant wanted her to become the public education ambassador after the honeymoon. He said her work with children made her the perfect person to lead a new initiative. Rose read only a few pages before her hands began to shake. Buried beneath language about reputation, privacy, and coordinated communication was a clause preventing Maya from making public statements about foundation activities without written approval. There were financial penalties, confidentiality rules, and restrictions that would follow her even if she stepped away from the role. It was not a partnership agreement, it was a leash. That night, Rose went home, opened the linen cabinet, and took out the cedar box for the first time in almost 2 decades. Inside, beneath a yellowing knit scarf Eleanor had once used to wrap the documents, were pages bearing the old woman's signature, a sealed letter addressed to Rose, and a thin ledger written in a disciplined hand. The first page of the letter made one thing painfully clear. Eleanor had not asked Rose to protect a fortune. She had asked her to protect people. And if the day came when a Holloway tried to use marriage, charity, or public admiration to silence someone vulnerable, Rose was to make sure the truth reached the light. Rose had no idea how close that day was until the morning of Maya's wedding. The morning of the wedding arrived under a hard, bright sky that made every window of the Holloway estate shine. By 7 o'clock, the chapel garden was already filled with florists, caterers, stylists, photographers, and assistants carrying clipboards. The place looked less like a home than a machine built to manufacture a perfect memory. Every rose had been inspected. Every candle had been placed at the correct height. Every place card had been checked twice. And in the center of it all, Maya was being prepared to marry the man everyone insisted had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. Rose arrived alone just after 9. She wore the blue dress Maya had helped her choose, a simple coat against the morning chill, and the old cedar box tucked inside a canvas bag. She had spent the night reading Eleanor's letter until the words blurred. There was no instruction telling her to interrupt a wedding, no sentence ordering her to humiliate Grant or expose the family in front of strangers. Eleanor had only asked her to act before another innocent person became part of a lie. That difference mattered to Rose. She did not want revenge. She did not even want to ruin Grant. What frightened her was the thought of Maya spending years trying to understand why the man she loved had slowly taken control of her voice, her work, and her memories of what was right. Rose had watched that happen to women before. It rarely began with cruelty that anyone else could see. It began with decisions made on their behalf, concerns dismissed as stress, and gratitude demanded in exchange for a comfortable cage. Catherine saw Rose before Maya did. Her eyes moved to the canvas bag, then to Rose's shoes, then to the anxious way Rose searched the corridor for someone who could take her to the bridal room. Catherine greeted her with polished restraint, but the message beneath her manners was immediate. Rose had not been expected to arrive so early, and the family could not allow distractions on a day meant to be photographed from every angle. Rose asked to speak with Maya privately. Catherine explained that the bride was overwhelmed and could not be disturbed. Rose said the matter could not wait. Catherine's expression barely changed, but she sent an assistant to find Grant. Grant appeared several minutes later in his formal suit, surrounded by the calm authority of someone accustomed to people making space for him. At first, he treated Rose like an inconvenience that could be managed. He suggested she give Maya the box after the ceremony. He reminded her that the bride had enough emotions to handle. He implied that an old family matter could surely wait until the guests had gone home. Then Rose told him that the box had belonged to Eleanor. The change in Grant was small, but Rose had spent enough years at bedsides to recognize the body's betrayal of the mind. His shoulders tightened, his gaze dropped toward the bag, and returned too quickly. For a moment, the careful warmth in his face disappeared. He asked Rose what exactly Eleanor had given her. Rose did not answer. She only said that Maya needed to see it before signing anything connected to the Holloway Foundation. That was when Grant stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. He spoke to Rose in the low, controlled manner of a man who knew anger would look bad if anyone overheard. He suggested that grief could distort old memories. He implied that she might be confused by documents she did not understand. He warned her that upsetting Maya on her wedding day would be unforgivable. Rose had heard sharper words in hospital rooms, usually from families who had mistaken fear for authority. She told him that a person who feared the truth before a marriage had no right to ask for trust after it. Grant's face hardened. He did not order the guards to remove her immediately. Not then. He knew that would draw attention. Instead, he asked one of Catherine's assistants to escort Rose to a side lounge and promised that Maya would join her when she was ready. It was a softer form of exile, designed to look considerate. For 20 minutes, Rose sat alone in a room decorated with cream-colored furniture she was afraid to touch. Outside the door, footsteps passed without stopping. The wedding moved forward as though she had already been erased from it. She could hear distant music being tested in the chapel and the low murmur of guests arriving. With every minute, she felt the old weight of hesitation return. Perhaps Maya deserved a quiet day. Perhaps Rose was about to damage the one thing her niece had allowed herself to want. Then she remembered Lila. She remembered Maya at 14, trying to be brave at a funeral because she thought crying would make Rose's burden heavier. She remembered every time Maya had stood up for a child who had been treated as difficult rather than deserving. and she realized that protecting Maya's peace by hiding the truth was not protection at all. It was surrender. Rose left the lounge and headed toward the bridal corridor. The assistant tried to stop her. Rose apologized and kept walking. Catherine saw her approaching and immediately understood what was happening. Grant had just taken his place near the chapel entrance, where the first guests could see him. To anyone watching, he looked composed and proud. But when Rose reached the corridor, his composure cracked. Maya was only a few doors away, surrounded by bridesmaids and makeup artists. She heard raised voices, then stepped into the hall before someone could close the door. Her wedding dress caught the morning light, and for a second, Rose saw the little girl she had raised, dressed for a future Rose had once believed would be safe. Grant moved between them. He told Maya that Rose was tired and upset, that she had become confused about an old matter related to his grandmother. He made it sound merciful, as though he were protecting both women from embarrassment. Maya looked at Rose, waiting for her aunt to deny it or explain. Rose tried to reach into the bag. Grant caught her wrist. It was not a violent movement. That was what made it worse. It was quick, controlled, almost invisible. But Maya saw it. She saw the way Rose flinched. She saw the anger in Grant's eyes before he replaced it with concern. And something inside her shifted. Grant released Rose immediately and tried to draw Maya away from the moment. He reminded her that hundreds of guests were arriving. He spoke about timing, pressure, and how much stress Rose must be under. He made the entire situation sound like a fragile inconvenience that Maya had the duty to manage. Maya asked Rose whether she needed help. Rose looked at her, then at Grant, and made a decision that broke her own heart. She told Maya that she did, but that the truth could not be spoken in a hallway full of people who wanted it hidden. Catherine called security. What happened next was the moment that would later be described in different ways by every person who had witnessed it. Some guests would say Rose refused to cooperate. Others would insist the guards were only guiding her outside. Catherine would claim the family had been concerned for Rose's well-being. Grant would tell anyone who listened that he had tried to protect Maya from a painful misunderstanding. But Maya remembered the facts. She remembered Rose clutching the cedar box. She remembered the guards treating a 68-year-old woman as though dignity were something that could be removed by force. She remembered Grant watching instead of stopping them. And she remembered the hollow feeling that came when a person she loved showed her, without realizing it, who they were. Rose was taken through the side doors and into the driveway. The music inside the chapel swelled. The wedding coordinator hurried Maya toward the room where she was supposed to wait until the processional. Everyone spoke at once, telling her there was no need to worry, no need to ruin the day, no need to let Rose's confusion become a disaster. Maya let them lead her for several steps. Then she stopped. The word disaster lingered in her mind. It was the same word Grant had used 3 weeks earlier when one of his foundation employees had tried to meet with him after being dismissed. Maya had asked what happened, and Grant had said the employee was creating a disaster because she had misunderstood how professional organizations worked. At the time, Maya had accepted the explanation. Now she remembered the coldness behind it. She looked down at her hands and noticed something folded beneath the white ribbon of her bouquet. Rose must have slipped it there when Grant had grabbed her wrist. It was a single page torn from Eleanor's letter. Maya read it in the quiet of the preparation room while her bridesmaids watched her face change. The handwriting was weak but clear. Eleanor had written that there were people who called themselves guardians of a legacy, while feeding on the very trust they were supposed to protect. She had written that the family's greatest danger was not scandal, but the habit of teaching others to confuse wealth with virtue. And near the bottom of the page, she had left a warning addressed not to Maya by name, but to whoever might one day be asked to marry into the Holloway world. Never sign away your voice in exchange for a place at their table. Maya read the sentence twice. Then she asked her bridesmaids to leave. For the first time all morning, no one told her what the next step should be. Outside, Grant was taking his place near the altar. He believed Rose had been removed. He believed the box was still in her hands, but far enough away to handle after the ceremony. He believed Maya had been surrounded by enough pressure, beauty, and expectation to keep her moving forward. He did not understand that the best thing Rose had ever given Maya was not shelter, food, or even love. It was the ability to recognize the moment when silence became a betrayal. Maya removed her veil, not because she had decided anything yet, but because she needed to see clearly. Then she left the room through the service hallway, past the floral displays and polished mirrors, and walked toward the driveway where Rose was waiting beside the car that had brought her there. The ceremony had not begun, but the marriage was already over. Rose was sitting on the low stone wall near the estate driveway when Maya found her. The security men had stepped back once they realized the bride was walking toward them, but they remained close enough to remind Rose that even outside the chapel, the Holloway family believed they could decide where she belonged. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Maya stood in her wedding dress without a veil, carrying a bouquet she no longer knew what to do with. Rose looked smaller than she had that morning, not because she was weak, but because the years of keeping Eleanor's secret had suddenly become visible in the curve of her shoulders. Maya sat beside her and reached for the cedar box. Rose did not hand it over immediately. She asked Maya to understand that whatever happened next had to be Maya's choice. Rose had not come to command her, to punish Grant, or to turn one terrible morning into the only definition of Maya's life. She had come because a marriage could survive disappointment, fear, even ordinary mistakes. It could not survive a foundation built on contempt. Then she opened the box. Inside was the original third codicil to Eleanor Holloway's will, signed before 2 independent witnesses and sealed by a small legal practice outside Briarwood. It had never appeared in the estate papers Catherine presented after Eleanor died. The document did not take every dollar from the Holloway family or hand Rose some secret fortune. Its purpose was more precise. Eleanor had placed the voting control of the foundation into a protective trust, to be activated if a member of her family used the organization to conceal fraud, retaliate against employees, or coerce another person into surrendering their voice for the sake of the Holloway name. Rose had also kept a ledger Eleanor compiled during the last months of her life. It tracked grants that were publicly announced but never fully delivered, contracts redirected through companies controlled by Catherine's friends, and scholarships that disappeared from internal lists after the cameras had gone. The final pages contained names. They were not the names of powerful people. They belonged to teachers, community coordinators, social workers, and former foundation employees who had tried to raise concerns and had been quietly pushed out. There was one name Maya recognized at once. It belonged to a woman named Helena Ward, a former director of the Holloway Education Initiative. 3 weeks earlier, Grant had called Helena a disgruntled employee who had tried to create problems after losing her position. Maya had believed him because she wanted to believe him. But the ledger showed that Helena had objected to funds being moved out of school programs and into a marketing campaign designed around Grant's public image. Her dismissal had not been a misunderstanding. It had been retaliation. At the bottom of the box lay the agreement Grant wanted Maya to sign after the wedding. Rose had found a copy among documents left at Maya's apartment. Eleanor's letter explained why it mattered. Grant was not simply inviting Maya to become an ambassador for the foundation. He wanted her to become the moral face of a new campaign while binding her to confidentiality terms that would make it difficult for her to speak if she discovered what the family had done. Maya held the papers in her lap. The chapel bells began to ring behind them, a signal that the ceremony should be starting. For years, she had thought love meant believing in the best version of someone until they proved otherwise. But looking at the documents, she understood that Grant had already proved otherwise. She had simply been given reasons to look away. Rose told her there was one more thing Maya needed to know. Before coming to the wedding, Rose had sent copies of every document to the legal practice named in Eleanor's codicil and to the 3 independent trustees Eleanor had selected long ago. Rose had delayed for years because the evidence alone had not been enough to show the full pattern. But Grant's attempt to bind Maya to silence, combined with his treatment of Rose that morning, had made the pattern impossible to deny. Maya could not undo what Grant had done. She could not bring back the employees who had lost their jobs, or the children whose programs had been cut while the Holloways posed for photographs. But she could refuse to become the next polished layer over the truth. She stood and took Rose's hand. When they walked back into the chapel, the guests turned toward them with the curiosity of people who had waited too long without an explanation. Grant was at the altar beneath an arch of white flowers, looking composed, but increasingly irritated. Catherine sat in the front row, her face fixed in the expression of someone prepared to call anything inconvenient a misunderstanding. Maya did not rush. She did not let the wedding coordinator guide her into position. She walked down the aisle beside Rose, not because Rose needed to be rescued, but because neither of them would be separated again to make someone else comfortable. Grant tried to meet Maya with concern. He made the expression of a man ready to forgive a bride for panicking under pressure. He moved toward her, as though the only obstacle between them was a private emotional moment that could be smoothed over with the right words. Maya stopped several feet away. She told him, before their families and the people who had come to admire them, that there would be no wedding. She said she could not marry a man who treated her aunt's dignity as an inconvenience. She could not marry someone who used charity to build his image while hiding the harm done to the people who trusted him. And she would not sign away her voice so that the Holloway family could keep calling itself generous. The room did not explode into chaos. Real shock rarely does. It arrived as stillness. Grant's first instinct was to deny everything. He insisted that Rose had misunderstood old documents and that Maya had been manipulated on an emotional day. He suggested that the papers belonged in the hands of lawyers, not guests. In a narrow sense, he was right. The documents did belong with lawyers. That was exactly where Rose had already sent them. But Grant made one mistake. In trying to diminish Rose, he revealed the same contempt that had brought them all to that moment. He described her as a former employee who had spent too long attached to the family's past. He spoke as though years of service made her less credible, not more. Several people in the room looked at one another. Some had worked with the foundation. Some had seen the polished version of Grant for years. And suddenly, they remembered the staff members who had vanished The programs announced with fanfare and then quietly abandoned. The questions that had never received answers. Catherine rose from her seat and tried to take control. She suggested postponing the ceremony, moving the discussion somewhere private, protecting Maya from further embarrassment. But Maya understood the language now. Private had always meant hidden. Protected had always meant silenced. She placed the cedar box on the front pew and walked out of the chapel with Rose. The photographs later showed the moment in a way no one could have planned. The bride was still wearing white, but she was not crying. Rose was still carrying her worn canvas bag. Behind them, the flowers, musicians, and imported decorations remained exactly where they had been placed. Expensive proof that beauty could not save a lie once the truth had entered the room. The fallout did not happen in one dramatic afternoon. It happened through letters, audits, meetings, frozen accounts, and people finally realizing they were no longer alone. Within 48 hours, the independent trustees filed for an emergency review of the Holloway Foundation. The legal practice confirmed the authenticity of Eleanor's codicil. Grant's public role was suspended, while outside auditors examined the records, and Catherine resigned from the board before the trustees could vote to remove her. The family's public relations team called it a dispute over estate documents, but that explanation collapsed when former employees began sharing their own records. Helena Ward came forward first, with years of emails showing that Grant's office had delayed grants until media campaigns could be arranged. A regional coordinator described programs cut because the children they served did not fit the right image. A finance manager produced instructions to classify image-building expenses as community outreach. The Holloways had protected themselves by making each person believe their experience was isolated. Once those people compared their records, the pattern was impossible to deny. The investigation found that Grant had inherited a culture of manipulation from Catherine and had learned to make it look modern, polished, and strategic. But he had intensified it. He planned to make Maya the face of an education campaign because her sincerity gave him what money could not buy: credibility. Grant had spent years deciding which children were visible enough to deserve help. In the end, his future depended on the testimony of people he had tried to make invisible. The protective trust took control of the foundation's voting rights. It rebuilt the board with teachers, community representatives, former program staff, and independent financial oversight. Grants were reviewed, neglected programs were restored where possible, and the people who had been ignored were finally given a chance to speak before decisions were made again. Grant faced civil cases, financial inquiries, lost partnerships, and the collapse of the public platform he had treated as proof of his worth. More painful to him than the money was the loss of control. For the first time, he could not shape the narrative with a smile, a speech, or a carefully placed photograph. Catherine watched the family name become a symbol of everything Eleanor had tried to prevent. She was undone, not by a stranger, but by the records of the woman she had dismissed as powerless. Rose did not become rich or accept a seat at the head of the foundation. She returned to her small apartment and neighborhood clinic, but the trustees asked her to serve as a community advisor. She agreed only if teachers and families had more influence than donors. Maya took time away from work after the wedding that never happened. She grieved the man she thought Grant was, the future she had imagined, and the embarrassment of having nearly walked into a life designed to shrink her. But she did not regret leaving. She learned that heartbreak was not proof of weakness. Sometimes it was proof that a person had chosen truth before comfort. Months later, Maya returned to her classroom. The room still had chipped tables, picture cards, and students who needed more help than the system could easily provide. But the Holloway Foundation, now under new oversight, funded the program without camera crews or branding requirements. Maya refused the title of ambassador when the trustees offered it. She chose instead to help create a teacher-led advisory group that no single wealthy family could control. On the first day the new devices arrived, Maya watched one of her students use a communication screen to tell his mother that he was happy. It was a small sentence. No newspaper printed it. No donor stood nearby to claim credit. Yet Maya thought of Eleanor, of Rose, and of all the people whose names had been hidden in a ledger because someone believed their lives were not impressive enough to matter. That was the lesson Grant Holloway never understood. A person's value is not measured by the room they are allowed to enter, the clothes they can afford, or the power they seem to hold. It is measured by what they do when someone else's dignity is placed in their hands. And sometimes, the person everyone tries to remove from the room is the only one carrying the truth that can save it. If this story moved you, remember this. Never confuse polished appearances with good character. The way someone treats those they believe cannot help them will always reveal more than the words they use in public. At dawn, Arthur Vale stood near Hangar 12 with an old blue toolbox at his feet. His old tools made them doubt him.
We will continue without your advice.
To Arthur, the aircraft was already telling a different story.
The right side sounds different.
Arthur trusted the sound. He had heard that pattern before.
They missed the first sign.
Hidden beneath the calm rhythm of metal and engines. Mara Ellison noticed what the others ignored.
What did you hear?
Arthur was not guessing. He was listening.
The pulse comes first.
Then he heard it again. A small change. A familiar rhythm.
There. That is the sound.
A warning no screen had explained yet. And before anyone understood why that brass mirror mattered, the moment had already become the beginning of the truth. Only later would that mirror matter. Later, people would understand what that moment meant. They would see the billionaire stepping over the old mechanic's mirror and recognize the cruelty in it instantly. They would understand that Julian Mercer had not only stepped over a tool, he had stepped over experience, warning, poverty, and truth. But at that moment, outside the fence of Hangar 12, nobody saw the symbol. They only saw an old man being dragged away from an aircraft he had no permission to touch. The only person who did not laugh was Mara Ellison. Mara was not an engineer or a mechanic. She was an operations coordinator, the kind of employee important men rarely noticed until something went wrong. She handled access badges, schedules, vendor records, inspection rooms, maintenance logs, and all the quiet details that allowed Mercer Aerotech to look organized from the outside. She had worked there for 11 years, long enough to know the difference between a company that talked about safety and a company that truly listened to warnings. And the look on Arthur Vale's face bothered her. He did not look like a confused old man. He did not look like someone trying to cause trouble. He looked like a man who had heard danger before anyone else recognized it. Even after Julian humiliated him, even after the guards dragged him away and his tools scattered across the concrete, Arthur kept looking past the people and toward the aircraft. That was what Mara could not forget. Most people, when insulted that publicly, would stare at the person who hurt them. Arthur looked at the machine. After security left him near the service road, Mara found him kneeling beside the curb, placing his tools back into the dented blue box one by one. He did not seem surprised when she approached. Men who spend their lives around failing machines often know when something is coming before it arrives. She asked how he knew about the right wing. Arthur did not give her a resume. He did not defend his pride. He only explained what he had heard. The engine note was clean, he said, but beneath it there had been a second rhythm, a small pulsing tremor that did not match fan speed, hydraulic cycling, or actuator movement. When the warnings appeared, they appeared in the wrong order for a software fault. Something physical was lying to the control system before the control system began protecting itself. Mara had listened to expensive consultants talk for 3 weeks. They used larger words than Arthur, but Arthur made more sense. Then she asked what would happen if Julian ran the test again. Arthur looked toward the hangar and said the aircraft would probably shut itself down again. But the repeated false response could begin stressing a secondary hydraulic isolation valve. If Mercer replaced that valve afterward, without finding the original source, the jet might pass one clean test and still carry the hidden fault into the air. That answer frightened Mara because it did not sound dramatic. It sounded practical. Inside the hangar, Julian was already demanding another run. Mara had a choice. She could return to her desk. She could tell herself she was not qualified, not responsible, and not brave enough to risk her job for a stranger. She could do what people inside large companies learn to do when instinct warns them, but their paycheck tells them to stay quiet. She could wait until the failure became undeniable and then claim she had never known enough to act. But silence, she had learned, was not neutral. Sometimes silence was only obedience wearing a safer name. So she brought Arthur back in. She did not make a scene. She used an old parts corridor, a canceled vendor badge, and a maintenance observation room no executive had visited in months. Arthur clipped the borrowed badge to his old jacket without even reading the name. He had spent most of his life in places where the label on a person's chest mattered less than whether that person could hear when a machine was in trouble. From the observation room above the hangar floor, Arthur watched the next test begin. Below them, the Meridian X7 came alive again. Dr. Evan Rusk, Mercer Aerotech's Vice President of Advanced Systems, stood near the main diagnostic station with the calm posture of a man who believed every room belonged to him. Rusk was not foolish, and that made him dangerous. For 3 weeks, he had guided the investigation towards software anomalies, supplier defects, and isolated sensor failures. He had dismissed early concerns about vibration near the right-wing route, not by destroying them, but by burying them under categories that made them look unimportant. Arthur did not know all of that yet, but he knew the type. Aviation had always had men who believed truth could be managed politically. They treated machines as if machines cared about schedules, investors, reputations, or titles. But aircraft do not care about any of those things. A hidden fault does not become safer because a billionaire needs a demonstration flight. Sooner or later, the machine demands payment. As the engines rose, Arthur placed one hand lightly against the metal frame of the observation window. He was too far from the aircraft to diagnose by touch, but vibration travels through structures in patterns most people never notice. Mara watched his face. His eyes narrowed before the first alarm appeared. He knew before the screens knew. Then the warnings returned. This time, a new message appeared beneath the others. The secondary hydraulic isolation response had delayed. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. Arthur had predicted it. On the hangar floor, Rusk immediately recommended replacing the hydraulic isolation valve and related module. It sounded decisive. It sounded expensive. It sounded like progress. But Arthur's expression tightened. To him, the new warning was not the cause. It was only the bruise left by the original injury. He asked Mara for the maintenance records from the last major modification near the right wing. Mara hesitated only once. Then she opened the files. 6 months earlier, the Meridian X7 had undergone a luxury cabin refit, acoustic upgrades, environmental system changes, and structural access work near the wing carry-through. The work had been finished ahead of schedule. Every inspection box had initials. Every approval line looked clean. Too clean. Arthur searched not for what was written, but for what should have been written and was missing. He saw vague language where precise torque confirmation should have appeared. He saw a late-night sign-off from a technician ID used on overlapping work. He saw a photo attachment briefly flagged as non-conforming, then marked resolved. When the photo opened, Mara thought it looked ordinary. Arthur did not. The image showed a vibration-dampening bracket near the lower right wing root. Beneath one edge sat a thin shim, a spacer inserted where the bracket should have seated flush. To a casual eye, it was almost invisible. To Arthur, it was the kind of shortcut that turns a small alignment issue into a hidden amplifier. Under light load, the assembly would behave. Under rising thrust, vibration could travel through the shim, reach the nearby control feedback harness, and create a false stabilizer signal. The computer would believe the aircraft's tail surface had moved when it had not. The hydraulic system would try to correct a lie. The correction would create pressure disturbances and thermal echoes. The screens would show unrelated warnings because the aircraft was reporting symptoms from a hidden cause. The experts had been chasing ghosts. Arthur had found the grave. Then he saw the reference number attached to the retrofit kit, and his hand went still. Project Larkspur. Mara noticed the change in him immediately. Until that moment, Arthur had been focused, tired, and steady. Now something old moved behind his eyes, something heavier than a technical problem. Project Larkspur was not just a design file, it was a wound. 16 years earlier, Arthur Vail had been one of the best practical maintenance minds in an experimental aviation program, studying vibration and control feedback. He did not have the highest degree in the room, but he often found the fault first. He could hear a bearing starting to fail before a sensor trend caught it. He could feel through a wrench when a bracket was seating wrong. Back then, people listened. Then a prototype aircraft suffered a serious control anomaly during a storm approach. The official investigation blamed improper maintenance oversight. Arthur was the senior mechanic on paper, and paper mattered more than truth when frightened executives needed a simple conclusion. He lost his certification, his job, his reputation, and eventually the house he had shared with his wife, Evelyn. He tried to appeal, but records went missing. Raw data was withheld, and legal letters arrived faster than hope. When Evelyn became ill, he chose medicine over lawyers. After she died, the last person who fully believed him was gone. For 16 years, Arthur lived as the man officially blamed. Now the same family of vibration control ideas had returned inside Mercer's flagship jet, carrying the same kind of warning he had once tried to explain. Mara did not know the whole story, but she could feel its weight. She printed the inspection photo before the system locked the record again. Arthur took the brass mirror from his toolbox and wiped it with his sleeve. Then he told her they needed to open the right wing panel before Rusk replaced the hydraulic module and buried the evidence beneath a false repair. Getting to the aircraft was easier than it should have been. In large companies, everyone assumes someone else has checked the person walking with purpose. Mara carried a clipboard. Arthur carried a toolbox. Together, they looked official enough to cross half the hangar before anyone questioned them. At the right wing root, Arthur knelt with effort. His knee stiffened badly, but he did not complain. Pain had become background noise long ago. He loosened the panel fasteners and angled the brass mirror into the narrow space behind the structure. There it was. The shim. The bracket showed faint fretting marks where vibration had worked against the support. The nearby control feedback harness had a polished gray shine along its outer insulation. Not cut, not failed, but rubbed and compressed by repeated contact. It was exactly the kind of damage that could escape a standard continuity test and still corrupt a signal under load. Arthur did not celebrate being right. Good mechanics do not celebrate danger. Then Dr. Evan Rusk saw him. At first, Rusk did not shout. He did not need to. His body simply went still near the diagnostic station. His eyes fixed on the open panel, on the old man kneeling beside the right wing root, on the brass mirror angled into the dark space where no unauthorized person was supposed to look. For one brief second, the calm professional mask slipped from his face. What appeared beneath it was not confusion. It was fear. Julian Mercer followed Rusk's gaze and turned toward the right wing. His expression changed so quickly that several mechanics stepped back before he even spoke. Less than an hour earlier, Julian had ordered the old man dragged away from the fence. Now that same old man was inside the hangar, beside the flagship aircraft, holding the kind of evidence that could turn an engineering failure into a corporate scandal. Julian crossed the hangar floor with security behind him. He accused Arthur of trespassing. He accused Mara of violating restricted access. He accused the mechanics nearby of allowing a dangerous breach near a multi-million-dollar aircraft. He did not ask what Arthur had found. He did not look into the open panel. He only understood one thing. A man he had humiliated was now standing too close to the truth. Arthur rose slowly. His knee made the movement difficult, and the hangar saw that too. He did not look powerful. He looked like an old mechanic who had spent too many years carrying pain quietly. But behind him, the open panel spoke louder than status. The shim was there. The rubbed harness was there. The fretting on the bracket was there. The aircraft had hidden the answer in plain structure, and Arthur had found it. Rusk stepped in with careful timing. He did not deny the shim. That would have sounded defensive. Instead, he framed the discovery as contaminated. Arthur had no active certification, no authorization, and no chain of custody protection. Once an unauthorized outsider opened the panel, Rusk said, no one could know whether the harness had been disturbed or whether any evidence inside could be trusted. Then he used the word that made the hangar colder. Sabotage. He did not say Arthur had done it. He only said the company had to consider the possibility. A disgraced former mechanic with a personal history involving aircraft control failures had entered the facility under false credentials and accessed a critical system area. The sentence was polished, cautious, and poisonous. A broken aircraft was complicated. A saboteur was easy. Mara felt the room shift. She understood what Rusk was doing. He was not trying to prove Arthur wrong. He was trying to make Arthur unusable. If Arthur became a contamination risk, the evidence could be delayed. If he became a possible saboteur, his warning could become motive. If Mara became the employee who let him in, her concern could be framed as recklessness instead of courage. Arthur had seen this kind of burial before. 16 years earlier, the words had been different, but the shape was the same. Improper maintenance oversight, failure to verify, inadequate detection, terms clean enough for reports, heavy enough to crush a life. Back then, men in quiet rooms had taken a complicated failure and arranged it until it pointed at the person least able to fight back. But this time, Arthur was not alone outside the fence. Cal Benton, an older Mercer mechanic, stepped closer to the open panel. He looked at the shim, then at the harness, then at Rusk. Cal had worked around aircraft too long to pretend the old man had invented what they were seeing. He had laughed earlier, not because Arthur was funny, but because fear and exhaustion had made him weak. Now he had seen enough. Cal said the panel should be photographed as found and tested before anything was replaced. Arthur's theory could be checked safely, without running the engines. A controlled vibration trace at the wing root, while monitoring the feedback harness and hydraulic response, would show the order clearly. If Arthur was wrong, the data would clear the concern. If he was right, the false signal would appear before the hydraulic dip. Rusk rejected the test too quickly. That was his mistake. In a technical room, speed can reveal fear. Another mechanic said the test would take less than 15 minutes. A younger technician admitted that vibration near the right wing root had been mentioned during the first week, but the concern had been redirected towards software. Someone else remembered an inspection note that disappeared from the active troubleshooting package after Rusk reviewed it. Truth entered the hangar trembling, but it entered. Julian sensed control slipping away. He hated it. But there were too many witnesses now. Too many eyes on the open panel. Too many mechanics beginning to understand that the old man had found the physical origin of a failure their screens had only translated into symptoms. If Julian refused the test, it would look like fear. So he allowed it, but only after warning that when the test proved nothing, Arthur would be removed, Mara would face consequences, and the company would treat the breach with full seriousness. Arthur did not react. He stepped back and let licensed Mercer technicians place the sensors. That mattered. He did not need to touch anything else. He had already shown them where to look. Now the machine itself would speak. The vibration unit was attached near the right wing root. The feedback harness was monitored. The hydraulic isolation response was tracked. The main screen displayed all three traces in sequence. Rusk stood near the diagnostic station, his arms folded, his face professionally blank. Julian stood beside him, ready to turn the old man's failure into a lesson for everyone watching. Mara remained near the tool cart, holding the printed inspection photo like a fragile shield. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. The traces stayed calm. A few executives near the glass offices exchanged looks, already preparing to believe this had all been an embarrassing waste of time. Rusk's posture loosened by a fraction. Julian's mouth tightened into the beginning of satisfaction. Then the frequency increased. A small ripple appeared on the feedback line. It was subtle, almost nothing. The kind of signal that would have been dismissed as noise if no one had known to watch for it. But Arthur's eyes did not leave the screen. The ripple sharpened. The stabilizer feedback channel flickered, showing a disagreement that lasted barely long enough to register. 3 seconds later, the hydraulic isolation response delayed. Then the same chain of ghost warnings began to form in miniature. The order was undeniable. The false stabilizer signal came first. The hydraulic dip came second. The thermal spike came third. The room went silent. It was not the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a lie losing protection. The aircraft had repeated Arthur's theory in front of the people who tried to mock it out of existence. The computer hadn't failed first. The hydraulic system hadn't failed first. The software had not invented the problem. The first wrongness came from the area Arthur had named while standing outside the fence. Julian stared at the data as if wealth could make numbers rearrange themselves. Rusk recovered faster. He said the result was interesting, but not conclusive. It still did not prove when the shim was installed. It did not prove the harness condition existed before Arthur opened the panel. He tried to pull the room back into uncertainty, back into procedure, back into fog. Then Mara placed the archived inspection photo onto the main screen. The same bracket appeared, the same shim, the same harness routed too close. The timestamp was 6 months old. Arthur could not have planted a shim 6 months before he entered the hangar. He could not have damaged a harness in a photograph taken long before anyone knew his name. He could not have invented the sequence that the vibration trace had just reproduced. The sabotage theory collapsed under the cold simplicity of time. Then Mara enlarged the approval section of the file. The final sign-off belonged to Dr. Evan Rusk. A low murmur moved through the hangar. It did not become loud. It did not need to. Everyone understood what they were seeing. The man who had dismissed the vibration notes redirected the investigation, accused Arthur of contamination, and recommended replacing the wrong module, had also approved the refit record containing the very shortcut now exposed in the right wing. Rusk's face lost color. Julian turned toward him, not with moral outrage, but with the fury of a man discovering that the person beside him might become expensive. For Julian, the danger was not yet the passengers who could have flown on that aircraft. It was not the mechanics nearly blamed for a decision above them. It was liability. Headlines. Canceled orders. Investors. The possibility that the old man he stepped over would become the most credible person in the building. Before Julian could reshape the moment, the hangar doors opened. Helena Cross entered with 2 safety committee investigators and a legal observer. Helena did not move quickly, yet everyone made space for her. Authority looks different when it does not need to perform. Mara had sent her the inspection photo through a protected reporting channel minutes earlier, along with a note that Arthur's predicted sequence had been reproduced. Helena had spent years watching companies turn warnings into paperwork, and paperwork into delay. She knew enough to come in person. Julian tried to greet her with controlled surprise. He began explaining that the situation was complicated, that unauthorized access had disrupted the investigation, and that Mercer Aerotech was handling the matter internally. Helena listened with the patience of someone allowing a man to build his own trap out loud. Then she looked at the screen. The vibration trace remained displayed. The archived photo remained beside it. Rusk's approval line sat beneath the enlarged image. The open panel remained visible near the right wing. No speech could make those things disappear. Helena asked why the aircraft had been prepared for another test after repeated flight control lockouts. She asked why the vibration concern had not been elevated after the first week. She asked why a non-conforming bracket image had been marked, resolved without formal deviation documentation. She asked why the person who approved the refit had not disclosed the relevance of that approval during the troubleshooting investigation. Nobody answered quickly. That was answer enough. Julian tried to argue that grounding the aircraft without full executive review would create unnecessary panic and damage a major international sale. Helena told him that panic was not caused by grounding an unsafe aircraft. panic was caused by pretending it was safe because the contract was large. The sentence landed like a verdict. She grounded the Meridian X7 immediately. No taxi test, no demonstration flight, no replacement of the hydraulic module until the right wing structure, bracket seat, feedback harness, and isolation valve were independently inspected. Helena Cross ordered all refit records preserved, all footage secured, and all personnel involved in the modification separated from the aircraft until formal statements were taken. The Meridian X7 was no longer a luxury product waiting for a buyer. It was evidence. Julian hated that word. Evidence meant the aircraft no longer belonged entirely to his schedule, his public relations team, or his money. Evidence meant order. Evidence meant timestamps. Evidence meant people who were used to being ignored could suddenly become witnesses. He tried to argue that the grounding was premature, that the foreign buyer would interpret it as instability, that the board would demand explanations, that investors would panic. But every objection made him look less like a leader protecting an aircraft and more like a man protecting a sale. Helena did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She reminded him that an aircraft with repeated control warnings, unexplained vibration traces, and a documented refit anomaly did not fly simply because a billionaire needed it to. The hangar listened to her because she spoke the way safety is supposed to sound: calm, precise, and completely unmoved by pressure. Mara stood several feet away, still holding the printed inspection photo. Her hands had stopped trembling, but her face had not recovered. She knew she had crossed lines. She knew a canceled badge and an old corridor would not look clean in any official report. But she also knew what would have happened if she had gone back to her desk and let Rusk replace the hydraulic module first. The real fault would have been hidden beneath a false repair, and the next clean test might have become the most dangerous one. Helena seemed to understand that. She did not excuse the access breach, but she protected Mara as a reporting witness. That detail angered Julian almost as much as the grounding. He wanted someone punished quickly. Punishment could have helped him control the story. If Mara was reckless, then Arthur was a trespasser. If Arthur was a trespasser, then the evidence was contaminated. If the evidence was contaminated, then the aircraft could return to the language Julian preferred: internal review, proprietary assessment, and temporary irregularity. Helena denied him that escape. Arthur listened without expression. He was not celebrating. His eyes remained on the aircraft. To him, the Meridian had not been fixed. It had only been heard. Men like Julian loved moments of public victory or defeat. Mechanics cared about what the machine would do tomorrow. A grounded aircraft was safer than a flying lie, but it was still a problem waiting to be understood completely. Dr. Rusk was placed on temporary administrative restriction pending review. He requested counsel almost immediately. He gathered his folder with careful hands and avoided looking at Arthur as he left the hangar floor. That avoidance told Arthur more than any confession could have. Rusk was not a man surprised by the evidence. He was a man surprised that evidence had survived. As the hangar began to clear, Helena approached Arthur. For the first time that day, someone with authority asked him who he was before deciding what he was. Arthur gave his name. Helena repeated it softly, and something shifted in her expression. She knew the name. Not from Mercer's current staff list, not from the borrowed badge on his jacket, but from an old aviation safety file that had never fully settled. Arthur Vale. Project Larkspur. The past which Arthur had spent years trying to survive rather than explain, rose into the room. Helena asked whether he had worked on Larkspur 16 years earlier. Arthur confirmed it, but he did not offer the story. He had no desire to open that wound in front of Julian, Rusk's legal shadow, and half a hangar of people who had laughed at him before lunch. But Helena already understood enough. Years earlier, an independent review had questioned parts of the Larkspur finding, though the record had never been fully reopened because key raw data was missing and the original company had collapsed into asset transfers. Arthur's hand tightened around the toolbox handle. For 16 years, the official world had treated him as a concluded matter, a failed mechanic, a revoked license, a cautionary footnote. Now someone was saying the conclusion had been questioned, not in rumors, but in review. Did not feel like triumph. It felt like grief arriving late with documents in its hands. Mara looked from Helena to Arthur and understood that the old man's connection to the Meridian was deeper than instinct. The failure inside the modern jet was echoing the failure that had destroyed his life. Helena ordered her team to pull every Mercer archive connected to Larkspur-derived architecture. Julian objected immediately, using words like proprietary limits, acquisition complexity, and irrelevant history. Helena did not argue emotionally. She simply stated that if Larkspur-derived systems appeared in the Meridian X7's control feedback design, then historical warnings were relevant to an active grounding. That ended the objection for the moment. But the real fight had only begun. Mercer Aerotech became quieter, and that quiet worried Mara more than shouting would have. The public relations team drafted careful language about a temporary safety pause. Legal counsel began separating documents into categories. Executives stopped speaking freely in hallways. Mechanics who had been ignored for weeks suddenly found their old notes requested by investigators. The hangar was no longer only a place where a jet had failed. It was a place where blame was being assigned, and everyone understood that powerful people would try to send it downward if they could. Arthur was taken to a glass conference room for a formal statement. The room had a long table, polished walls, and framed photographs of Mercer aircraft in perfect flight. Arthur sat at one end with his toolbox on the floor beside him. A security manager suggested removing it. Helena quietly told him not to. She may not have understood every tool in that box, but she understood enough to know that some objects are not weapons. They are the last proof of a life other people tried to erase. Mara sat nearby, pale but steady. She knew her job might not survive. She also knew that if Arthur had been right about the aircraft, then bringing him inside had not been recklessness. It had been the only reason the truth reached the panel before the false repair did. The questions began with what Arthur heard at the fence, what he predicted before the second test, what he saw in the refit photo, and what he found in the open panel. He did not exaggerate. He did not insult anyone. He described sequence, cause, and effect. That calm made his testimony stronger. Men who lie often decorate their stories. Arthur had spent a lifetime around machines, and machines punish decoration. One thing happens, then another thing happens. Because of it, the order matters. Then Julian's counsel asked about his revoked certification. There it was, the old stain placed carefully on the table. Arthur answered truthfully. His certification had been revoked after the Larkspur accident. He had appealed briefly, then stopped when his wife became ill, and the cost of fighting exceeded anything they had left. The official report blamed maintenance oversight, though Arthur had maintained from the beginning that the control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against him. Julian's counsel did not need to accuse him of anything new. The old accusation was useful enough. In corporate rooms, a damaged record can be used like smoke. It does not have to prove guilt. It only has to make people squint. Mara could not stay silent. She explained that Arthur identified the wing route before he entered the facility, before he accessed the records, before he opened the panel, and before anyone showed him the Larkspur reference. She explained that his warning about the hydraulic isolation valve came before the new warning appeared. She explained that the archived photo proved the shim existed long before Arthur was anywhere near the aircraft. Her voice shook at first, but facts steadied it. Julian accused her of emotional judgment. He suggested she had been manipulated by sympathy for a stranger. He reminded the room that she was not a mechanic, not an engineer, and not qualified to interpret aircraft systems. It was a cruel tactic because it dressed decency as incompetence. Arthur looked at him then. He did not raise his voice. He simply said that Mara had done what every safety manual claimed employees should do. She escalated a credible concern when the normal chain failed. If Mercer punished her for that, then the aircraft was not the only broken system in the building. For several seconds, no one spoke. Julian looked away first. That small movement did not restore Arthur's name. It did not fix the aircraft. It did not end the investigation. But everyone in the room felt the balance shift. The old man had not defended himself with anger. He had defended the person with less power. That is often how real character appears, not when victory is certain, but when punishment is still possible. By evening, the first version of the public story began leaking. Mercer's communications team tried to control it. They released a statement about an isolated configuration irregularity and a temporary safety review. They did not mention Arthur Vale. They did not mention the shim. They did not mention Julian's mockery at the fence or Rusk's attempt to turn the discovery into a sabotage concern. Companies often begin lying not by saying what is false, but by choosing which truths never enter the sentence. Then a financial news site published a harsher version, citing unnamed sources who claimed the Meridian investigation had been complicated by the involvement of a disgraced former mechanic tied to an old aviation accident. The article questioned Arthur's credibility. It described Mara's actions as unauthorized. It suggested internal experts were concerned about contamination, personal motives, and interference with proprietary systems. Arthur read the article on Mara's phone in silence. His name was once again attached to disgrace. For 16 years, he had lived under an official conclusion he could not afford to fight. The words were not new, but they cut differently now, because, for one day, he had allowed himself to believe truth might arrive cleanly. He should have known better. Truth often has to pass through mud before anyone admits it as water. Mara apologized, though she had not written the article. Arthur told her the company was doing what companies do when the witness is more dangerous than the failure. They could not yet defeat the evidence, so they were attacking the person who found it. But Julian had forgotten about his own cameras. Mercer Aerotech recorded nearly everything inside Hangar 12. The cameras had been installed to monitor workers, reduce liability, and protect company property. They recorded Arthur at the fence. They recorded Julian mocking him. They recorded the guards dragging him away. They recorded the tools spilling and the brass mirror sliding across the concrete. They recorded Arthur predicting the hydraulic warning before the second test. They recorded Rusk resisting the vibration trace, the archived photo on the screen, and the moment the room saw Rusk's approval line, the system designed to watch workers had watched the executives too. Mara knew where the safety archive copies were stored. Before her access could be fully restricted, she sent Helena the camera labels and timestamps through the protected reporting line. It was not a leak, it was preservation. There is a difference between exposing a company for entertainment and protecting evidence before powerful people can make it disappear. That night, Arthur returned to the small rented room above an old appliance repair shop where he lived. He had no real home in the way people meant the word. The room held a narrow bed, a hot plate, 2 shirts hanging from a pipe, old maintenance manuals, and a window that rattled whenever aircraft passed overhead. For years, the sound of planes had been both comfort and punishment. He could not stop listening to them, even after the world told him he no longer had the right to work on them. He placed the toolbox on the bed and opened it. The brass inspection mirror lay inside, scratched at the edges, its surface dulled by years of use. Arthur wiped it clean. In the mirror, he saw not only the tool, but the moment Julian stepped over it. He thought of Evelyn then, as he often did when a day wounded him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Evelyn had been the one person who never believed the official report. She had written letters, saved documents, and reminded him that losing a license did not mean losing the truth. Near the end of her illness, when Arthur had stopped fighting because medicine mattered more than lawyers, she told him that machines had always known who he was, even when men forgot. Arthur had not opened the storage box she left behind in years. Now he pulled it from the closet. Inside were old envelopes, faded photographs, unpaid medical notices he had never been able to throw away, and one small notebook wrapped in cloth. Arthur recognized it immediately. His shop notebook from the Larkspur years. He had thought it was lost. Maybe part of him had wanted to think that, because losing it hurt less than admitting he had been afraid to open the past. Between the pages, Evelyn had tucked a letter. Arthur unfolded it slowly. She had written it near the end, when her handwriting had begun to weaken, but her mind remained sharp. She told him that if the truth ever found him again, he should not turn away because of her. She knew he had chosen her care over the legal fight, and she did not want that choice to become another prison. She wrote that love was not the same as surrender. She wrote that if his name could still be restored someday, he should let it be restored. Arthur read the letter twice. For years, he had believed that choosing Evelyn over the appeal meant accepting the lie forever. Her words released him from a guilt he had carried so quietly that even he had stopped naming it. The dead cannot return what was stolen, but sometimes they can give the living permission to want it back. The notebook was rough, stained, and full of hand-drawn diagrams. It contained warnings about vibration-induced false feedback in lightweight control structures. It described dampening brackets, preload checks, harness clearance, and the danger of relying only on static testing when vibration was the real trigger. One phrase appeared more than once in Arthur's cramped handwriting. A bracket seated wrong can make the machine hear a ghost. The next morning, Helena's team found the first matching Larkspur file in Mercer's archive. It was an old technical memo, transferred during an acquisition years earlier. The memo described the same danger in cleaner language. It warned that a shimmed bracket could create a hidden path for vibration and make a control system believe a stabilizer had moved when it had not. Arthur read it in silence. The words were formal, but the thought beneath them was painfully familiar. Some of it had come from him. Years earlier, Before the Larkspur accident, Arthur had written practical warnings after late-night tests. Engineers had laughed at his phrasing and then used the idea because it was right. After the accident, many of his notes disappeared from the official record. Now, similar warnings existed inside Mercer's archive without his name attached. Mara watched his face and understood the theft before he explained it. They had not only blamed him for failing to catch a danger he had warned them about. Somewhere along the chain, they had preserved his insight, stripped away his name, built new technology from it, ignored its limits, and then nearly blamed him again when the old danger returned. That kind of injustice is not merely professional. It is intimate. A man can steal your tool and leave you angry. But when they steal your warning, erase your name, and later punish you for recognizing the danger first, they are trying to decide who is allowed to speak reality itself. The first video clip appeared online later that day. It was short, shaky, and recorded by someone outside the service road. It showed Arthur being dragged from the fence while people inside the hangar laughed. The audio was poor, but Julian's posture was unmistakable. Viewers did not know the full story yet, but they saw enough to become curious. Why had a billionaire aviation CEO mocked an old man near a grounded jet? Why had the demonstration been canceled afterward? Why did the old man protect his toolbox like it held the last pieces of his life? Mercer's attempt to bury Arthur began to fail because curiosity does not obey press releases. Then the longer safety footage reached Helena's investigators. Within hours, the internal narrative collapsed further. The footage proved Arthur warned them before the new failure appeared. It proved Rusk resisted the test that confirmed the sequence. It proved Julian treated a safety warning as an insult because it came from the wrong kind of person. And when news of the archived photo spread inside the company, mechanics who had stayed silent began remembering things aloud. One refit technician admitted he had questioned the shim 6 months earlier. Another remembered being told the deviation was resolved above his level. Cal Benton submitted a statement acknowledging that workers had been trained, not formally, but culturally, to stop writing concerns once leadership signaled impatience. None of them claimed innocence in a perfect way. That made their statements more believable. They had been afraid. They had been tired. They had survived by staying quiet. Now the aircraft had shown them what silence almost cost. Rusk was placed on formal suspension pending investigation. Julian did not defend him publicly. He began to distance himself with the speed of a man recognizing a sacrifice. He spoke of accountability, internal review, and his disappointment that critical information had not reached him clearly. But the cameras had already shown him ignoring the warning when it reached him in the plainest possible form. An old mechanic at the fence telling him where the fault lived. Rusk understood he was being prepared as the offering. That made him dangerous. Through counsel, he began producing emails showing the pressure Julian had placed on the Meridian team to maintain the demonstration schedule. None of the messages ordered anyone to install a shim or bury a warning. Men like Julian rarely write orders that way. They create conditions. They praise speed. They question delays. They make careers depend on impossible timelines, then act surprised when someone below them cuts a corner. Rusk's defense was not moral. It was survival. But survival has a way of dragging hidden truths into daylight. The two powerful men who had protected the same polished story began cutting each other with it. And then, late that night, Arthur received a phone call. The voice belonged to Raymond Sloan, a retired data analyst who who had worked on the original Larkspur investigation. He was old now, thinner than Arthur remembered, his voice worn down by years of silence. Raymond said he had seen the news. He had seen Arthur's face. He had seen the phrase Project Larkspur return to public conversation. And for the first time in 16 years, silence felt heavier than fear. Arthur said nothing. Raymond continued anyway. During the original investigation, he had helped convert raw flight telemetry into simplified event timelines for the review board. The official summary blamed maintenance oversight. But the raw data, Raymond said, showed something different. The control feedback anomaly began before the maintenance event Arthur was blamed for failing to catch. In plain terms, the aircraft had started lying to itself before Arthur could have caused the chain they placed on him. Raymond had copied the raw data and hidden it. Fear had kept him silent. Guilt had kept him from destroying it. Arthur closed his eyes. For 16 years, he had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. He had imagined anger, shouting, relief, vindication. But when it came, he felt almost still. The body, after carrying pain long enough, sometimes receives impossible news, as if it is simply too tired to react. He did not forgive Raymond on that call. Forgiveness is not a switch old pain turns on because someone finally tells the truth. But he agreed to meet him because the data mattered more than the apology. The copy was held in a safe deposit box in Cincinnati under the name of Raymond's late sister. Helena arranged for an investigator to accompany them because chain of custody mattered now. The evidence had to be clean enough to survive the lawyers Julian Mercer could afford. Arthur traveled with Mara. In his jacket pocket, he carried Evelyn's letter. At his feet, as always, sat the blue toolbox. He did not need the tools for the meeting. He brought them because they were the only witnesses that had never left him. Raymond met them in a public library, older than Arthur remembered, bent inward by cowardice and regret. He did not ask for easy forgiveness. He explained what he had done, how the raw sequence differed from the summary, how his supervisor had pressured him to treat the anomaly as inconclusive, and how he convinced himself that reopening the matter would destroy his family without saving Arthur. Arthur listened. He saw a man who had failed him. He also saw a man finally bringing forward the one thing powerful people had kept hidden. Human beings, Arthur knew, were more complicated than machines. Machines fail according to conditions. People fail according to fear. At the bank, the safe deposit box contained an old data cartridge, a printed index, and a letter from Raymond explaining why he had preserved it. The cartridge looked too small to carry the weight placed upon it. But Arthur knew small things could change everything. A shim, a wire, a missing line of data, a truth kept alive in the dark. Helena's team extracted the telemetry with help from a specialist who could still read the obsolete format. The process took hours. Arthur waited in a small municipal aviation office with Mara beside him, staring at a framed picture of an aircraft lifting into a blue sky. He wondered how many beautiful machines had carried ugly secrets, because men on the ground were too proud to stop them. When Helena entered, she did not look triumphant. That told Arthur the truth had weight. The raw data confirmed Raymond's claim. The Larkspur control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against Arthur. The original report had not merely simplified the timeline, it had reversed its meaning. Arthur's maintenance oversight had been used as the clean explanation for a deeper design and vibration issue that management did not want to own. For 16 years, the report had treated him like the first failure in the chain. Now the machine from his past had finally spoken, and the report had reversed, cause and effect. For years, Arthur had imagined that proof would feel like freedom. Instead, the first feeling was grief. He sat in the municipal aviation office with the raw telemetry summary on the table, and for several seconds, he could not move. The room around him seemed too clean for the truth it now contained. Fluorescent lights hummed above him. Mara sat beside him. Helena stood near the window with the expression of a woman who understood that official words could not return stolen years. Arthur thought of Evelyn. He saw her at the kitchen table, opening letters from agencies that never answered honestly. He saw the house they sold when medical bills grew faster than hope. He saw the certification notice that ended the only work he had ever truly loved. He saw the faces of employers who read his record and became polite in the way people become polite when they have already decided no. He saw the apprentices he never trained, the aircraft he never signed off, and the nights when he woke, hearing alarms from a storm he had not caused. Proof did not give those years back. It only proved that the pain had been telling the truth. Mara placed her hand gently over his. This time, Arthur let it stay. Helena explained that the old Larkspur finding would not be overturned in a single afternoon. Institutions moved slowly, especially when admitting an old error meant admitting that real people had lived beneath it. But the evidence was now too strong to ignore. Arthur's notebook, Raymond's raw telemetry, the Mercer archive, Rusk's approval record, the Meridian X7 failure, the shimmed bracket, the rubbed harness, and the hangar footage all pointed in the same direction. A warning had been made. A warning had been buried. A system had been built from the buried warning. And when the same danger returned, the same kind of men had tried to bury the mechanic again. This time, they were too late. The deeper story broke the next morning. Nina Patel, an aviation safety journalist known for careful reporting rather than loud scandal, published the first full account. She did not write Arthur as a fairy tale hero or Julian as a simple villain. She explained the failure sequence, the physical evidence inside the right wing, the archived refit photo, the vibration trace, the Larkspur connection, Raymond's raw data, and the culture that allowed technical concerns to become inconvenient noise. Her headline described Arthur as the mechanic who heard the failure before the screens understood it. That line traveled everywhere. Pilots shared it. Mechanics shared it. Safety inspectors debated it. Aviation students began mapping the timeline. Ordinary people did not understand every detail of dampening brackets or feedback harnesses, but they understood the image of an old man at a fence, warning experts, being laughed away, and then being proven right by the very aircraft they said he had no right to approach. They understood Julian stepping over the mirror. That image became the symbol of the entire scandal. A billionaire stepping over the tool of the man who would save his aircraft. A company stepping over experience. An industry stepping over a warning because the person giving it looked poor, old, and inconvenient. Mercer Aerotech could no longer control the story. Julian tried it first. He released a statement praising the safety review and claiming the company had acted with caution once new information emerged. But the footage made those words look thin. The cameras showed Arthur's warning. They showed Julian's mockery. They showed the guards pulling him away. They showed Rusk resisting the simple test. They showed Julian objecting to the grounding because of the demonstration schedule. It was difficult to claim caution when the world had watched you treat caution like an insult. The buyer suspended the fleet order. Regulators demanded records. Investors demanded leadership accountability. The board, which had once celebrated Julian's speed and confidence, now spoke in colder words. Governance, risk, oversight, exposure. Men like Julian often discover too late that the people who praise arrogance during profit will rename it recklessness during crisis. Rusk fell first. Investigators recovered the private message he believed had disappeared. It had survived in an automatic backup attached to a project management export. In that message, Rusk had discouraged formal deviation language about the shimmed bracket because it could trigger structural review and create schedule exposure. The phrase was polite, corporate, and damning. It showed exactly how danger becomes paperwork when the wrong person is trying to protect a calendar. Rusk was terminated for cause and referred for regulatory investigation. His professional reputation, built on precision and authority, began cracking beneath his own words. He had spent his career sounding careful. Now everyone could see that careful language had been used to hide careless judgment. Julian tried to make Rusk the entire scandal. He described himself as misled by advanced systems leadership. He spoke of disappointment. He promised reform. He praised the employees who had helped identify the concern, carefully avoiding the fact that one of those employees had to bring Arthur through an unofficial route because the official chain had failed. But Rusk, facing ruin, refused to become the only sacrifice. Through counsel, he produced emails showing Julian's repeated pressure to keep the demonstration flight on schedule despite unresolved modification concerns. None of the emails ordered anyone to commit misconduct in plain language. They did something more familiar and harder to prosecute. They created pressure. They rewarded speed. They punished delay. They made everyone understand what kind of truth leadership preferred. The two men who had once protected the same polished story began cutting each other with pieces of it. That was poetic justice, not because it was loud, but because it was exact. For years inside Mercer Aerotech, pressure had flowed downward. Executives demanded impossible timelines. Managers softened warnings. Mechanics carried the risk. Now the pressure flowed upward. The records used to control workers became evidence against executives. The cameras installed to monitor the hangar became witnesses against its owner. The old Larkspur files that erased Arthur's name became proof that his warning had outlived the people who stole it. While the powerful fought, the mechanics repaired the aircraft. The Meridian X7 remained grounded under independent oversight. Its right-wing panels were open, its harnesses were tagged, its bracket was removed. Its structure was lit by inspection lamps. Without the polished skin hiding its inner spaces, the aircraft looked less like a luxury object and more like what every aircraft truly is. A promise made out of metal, wire, pressure, tolerance, and trust. Arthur returned to Hangar 12 as an official technical witness. No one laughed this time. Cal Benton met him near the right-wing route. Shame sat plainly on the older mechanic's face. He had laughed at the fence. He had stayed quiet during the refit. He had survived in Mercer's culture by learning when not to challenge authority. Arthur did not demand an apology. He had little use for apology unless it changed what happened next. Cal understood that. He explained the repair plan with a humility that had not existed in the hangar before. The shim would be removed. The bracket seat would be restored and measured properly. The control feedback harness would be replaced and rerouted with correct clearance. The secondary hydraulic isolation valve would be inspected for stress from repeated false commands. The entire feedback loop would be recalibrated, under staged vibration load, not only static conditions. Every aircraft that had received the same modification package would be inspected before returning to service. Arthur listened. He did not take over. He did not touch anything he was not authorized to touch. He had already been punished once by a world eager to blur technical truth with procedural accusation. This time, he remained careful. Licensed technicians performed the work. Arthur observed, asked questions, and gave advice only when invited. But everyone in the hangar felt the standard change around him. A young engineer asked whether the bracket preload should be verified again after the first vibration cycle, rather than only before panel closure. Arthur almost broke then. Not when Julian insulted him. Not when Rusk was exposed. Not when the raw data confirmed his old warning. But when a young engineer listened to his practical concern and wrote it down without making him prove that his experience deserved space on the page. Respect, when denied long enough, can feel almost unbearable when it finally returns. The repair took 2 days. They ran the vibration trace before closing the panel, then again after closing it, then again after the first controlled system cycle. The ghost signal did not return. The feedback channel stayed clean. The hydraulic isolation response remained stable. The bleed air spike vanished because it had never been the disease. It had only been the echo. On the final ground test, Hangar 12 filled with people and silence. The engine started. The sound rose smoothly through the space. Arthur stood several feet behind the main line with his toolbox at his feet, one hand resting lightly on the handle. He listened not for power, but for absence. The wrong pulse was gone. The right-wing root no longer carried that faint, false rhythm he had heard from outside the fence. The thrust increased through the range where the failure had always appeared. No stabilizer warning. No hydraulic dip. No thermal spike. No lockout. The Meridian X7 did not announce that it had been healed. It simply behaved. A quiet cheer moved through the hangar. Mechanics shook hands. Engineers exhaled. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. Cal looked down and wiped his face as if no one could see him. Helena watched Arthur, understanding that the moment belonged to him more than any press release would ever admit. Arthur did not smile broadly. His relief was deeper than expression. For the first time in 16 years, he had helped bring an aircraft back to truth in front of witnesses who could not erase him. The successful test did not save Julian. It made his position worse. If the aircraft had remained mysterious, he might have hidden behind complexity. But the fix proved Arthur had been right from the beginning. It proved the problem had not required weeks of executive theater, millions in unnecessary parts, or attacks on a poor old mechanic. It required opening the correct panel, respecting the first warning, and listening to someone who understood machines without needing permission from a billionaire. The board announced that Julian Mercer would step aside pending an independent governance review. They did not call it removal. Men with money often receive softer words on the way down than working people receive while falling. But everyone understood. Julian had built an empire on speed, image, and control. He lost control because a machine refused to carry his pride into the sky. Mara's suspension was lifted. More than that, Helena recommended her for a newly created protected escalation role, ensuring that non-engineering staff could raise safety concerns without being crushed by chain-of-command politics. Some executives called it an overcorrection. Helena called it overdue. Mara accepted, not because she wanted praise, but because she knew how close she had come to staying silent. She wanted the next person with a warning to have a better door than the one she had been forced to break open. The refit technicians who had raised concerns were cleared. Cal Benton submitted a statement admitting that the hangar culture had trained workers to survive by becoming quiet. It was not an easy statement to write. It made him look weak in places, but it saved younger workers from carrying blame that belonged above them. And that was the first honest thing he had done in too long. Then came Arthur's hearing. The Aviation Authority reopened the Larkspur findings based on the raw telemetry, Raymond's testimony, Arthur's notebook, the Mercer archive, and the Meridian failure. It was not a grand courtroom moment. It was a modest regulatory office with a long table, cautious language, and people who understood that admitting an old mistake could embarrass institutions that preferred their past to remain settled. Arthur wore a dark jacket Mara helped him choose. He carried the toolbox anyway. No one asked him to. He brought it because some part of him needed the tools nearby when the world finally reconsidered the hands that had held them. Evelyn's letter rested in his inside pocket. Helena testified first about the Meridian failure and the Larkspur connection. Raymond testified next, older and shaken, explaining how the raw data had been reduced into a misleading summary and how fear kept him silent. Mara testified about the day at the fence, about Arthur's warning, about the decision to bring him inside, and about the way the aircraft proved the warning before the company accepted it. Cal submitted his statement, describing the repair and Arthur's diagnostic accuracy. Arthur spoke last. He did not ask the panel to pretend he had been perfect. He did not want a fairy tale. He wanted the sequence restored. He described the vibration concerns, the bracket preload warnings, the missing notes, the test night conditions, the raw data he requested but never received, and the official summary that placed cause after consequence and then called it truth. He spoke of Evelyn only briefly because grief was not evidence, but it was part of the cost. He explained that losing his certification had not only ended a job, it had removed him from the one language he had known since boyhood. The panel listened. Arthur had once spoken to rooms that were already closed against him. This room was not fully open, but it was no longer locked. When the questioning ended, the panel deliberated. Arthur waited in the hallway with Mara on one side and his toolbox on the floor beside his shoes. He did not pace. He had done enough waiting in his life to know that movement did not hurry judgment. Still, every minute carried the weight of 16 years. When the decision came, it arrived in careful language, as institutional truth often does. The original Larkspur finding would be amended. The agency acknowledged that the report had overemphasized maintenance oversight, while failing to properly account for vibration-induced control feedback anomalies that preceded the cited maintenance event. Arthur Vale's documented warnings would be added to the record. His professional standing would be restored for historical review purposes. His revoked certification, long expired under the original finding, would be reinstated in honorary status, with eligibility for supervised renewal if he chose to pursue it. The agency expressed regret. Regret. Such a small word for 16 years. Arthur lowered his head. Mara looked away to give him privacy. Helena did the same. Raymond covered his face at the far end of the hallway. Arthur thought of Evelyn, and grief arrived with gratitude tangled inside it. He wished she could have heard the decision. He wished it had come before the illness, before the house was gone, before shame became part of the air they breathed. But the truth had come at last. Late, wounded, imperfect, but real. And because it had come, the lie would not be the final thing written beside his name. Reporters waited outside the building. Some wanted anger. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted Arthur to condemn Julian, Rusk, the agency, and everyone who had failed him. But Arthur had spent enough of his life being used in other people's stories. He would not turn his pain into entertainment just because cameras had arrived. He spoke instead about listening. He said safety was not created by confidence. It was created by attention. It came from mechanics, technicians, inspectors, coordinators, and every person close enough to notice when something felt wrong. He reminded them that a machine does not care about titles, wealth, reputation, or pride. If a bracket is seated wrong, it is wrong. If a signal is false, it is false. If a warning comes from an old man at a fence, the warning does not become less true because the man's jacket is worn. That evening, the longer footage of Julian stepping over Arthur's fallen mirror was shown in a documentary segment about the Meridian scandal. The image became a symbol almost immediately. The public loved it because poetic justice is easier to understand when it fits in a single frame. Arthur saw something quieter. He saw the mirror. The next morning, he sat at the little table in his rented room and polished the brass inspection mirror with a soft cloth. Its surface was scratched. Its edges were worn. It did not reflect perfectly, but it reflected honestly enough. That had always been its purpose. It did not make hidden spaces beautiful. It made them visible. A week later, Mercer Aerotech invited Arthur back to Hangar 12. Not as a public relations ornament, though some people certainly wanted to use him that way. Helena made sure the invitation had substance. The company was creating a training program on practical fault recognition, safety escalation, and the danger of dismissing worker concerns. The young mechanics had asked for Arthur by name. He almost refused. The hangar still carried the echo of laughter. The fence, the guards, Julian's shoe stepping over the mirror, Rusk's sabotage accusation, all of it still lived there. But Mara reminded him that places do not become clean because good people leave them. They become clean when someone teaches the next generation not to repeat what happened there. Arthur returned. On his first morning as a training consultant, he stood beside an opened airframe in front of a group of apprentices. Some had degrees. Some had grease under their nails already. Some were young enough to believe modern diagnostics would catch every danger before human hands needed to. Arthur did not shame them for that. He opened his toolbox and placed the brass mirror on the bench. Then he placed Evelyn's letter beside it, folded closed, not for them to read, but for himself to remember why truth must be defended before people are forced to spend their lives proving they deserved it. He began with a simple lesson. A bracket can look seated and still be wrong. A harness can test clean and still lie under vibration. A screen can show symptoms without showing origin. A room full of experts can miss what one careful person hears, if the room has already decided who is worth listening to. The apprentices leaned forward. Arthur lifted the mirror and angled it into the dark space behind the training panel. In the small reflection, they saw what direct sight could not show. Hidden brackets, tight clearances, a road where vibration might travel. Nothing dramatic, nothing glowing red. Just the kind of ordinary place where danger waits when pride moves too fast. Arthur told them never to trust a closed panel simply because someone powerful was tired of waiting. Cal stood at the back of the room, listening. Mara stood near the door. now officially responsible for making sure warnings had a path. Helena watched from the corridor for a moment, then walked away without interrupting. The best reforms are not always announced. Sometimes they are practiced quietly until they become normal. Months passed. The Meridian X7 returned to service only after independent verification. Other aircraft touched by the same modification package were inspected. New reporting protections were created. Concern logs could no longer be buried by one executive's preference. Safety meetings began with uncomfortable questions instead of polished confidence. Julian disappeared from daily leadership. Rusk's case moved through regulators. Mercer Aerotech survived, but it did not survive unchanged. The company learned, painfully, that the cost of listening early is always smaller than the cost of being forced to listen later. Arthur never became rich. He did not want to. He did not move into a large house or become a celebrity expert with a glossy office. He kept a small room for a while, then accepted a modest apartment closer to the training facility because his knees were getting worse, and Mara insisted the stairs were trying to kill him. He complained about the move, but not very convincingly. On quiet evenings, he still heard aircraft pass overhead. The sound no longer punished him. Sometimes it reminded him of Evelyn. Sometimes it reminded him of the years that were gone. But sometimes, more often than before, it sounded like work still worth doing. One afternoon, after a training session, a young apprentice stayed behind. He was nervous, holding a report form in both hands. He told Arthur he had noticed a tiny vibration during a bench test, but he was not sure it meant anything. He was afraid of wasting everyone's time. Arthur looked at the form, then at the young man. For a moment, he saw himself decades earlier, standing in a room where his warning was treated as inconvenience. He saw the fence. He saw the mirror on the concrete. He saw Julian's polished shoe stepping over it. Then he looked at the apprentice and handed him a pen. He told him uncertainty was exactly where safety begins. The apprentice wrote the concern down. It turned out to be minor, a loose mount, easy to fix, no scandal, no headlines, no billionaire losing control in front of cameras. Just a small warning caught early, because someone had been taught not to stay silent. Arthur considered that one of the greatest victories of his life, because justice is not only when the powerful fall. Sometimes justice is when the next frightened person speaks sooner. Years later, people would still tell the story of the old mechanic at the fence. They would talk about the billionaire, the private jet, the hidden shim, the raw data, the exposed executive, and the mirror on the ground. They would call it unbelievable because people like stories where arrogance is punished and truth returns at the perfect moment. Arthur knew the truth was less perfect than that. Truth had come late. It had left scars. It had not saved Evelyn. It had not returned the house. It had not given him back the strength of his younger hands. But it had returned his name to him. It had changed a hangar. It had taught young workers that warnings do not become worthless because they come from someone without power. And maybe that was enough. On his final day of the first training cycle, Arthur stood inside Hangar 12 near the same fence where he had once been thrown out. The Meridian X7 rested in the distance, quiet and repaired. The brass mirror sat in his toolbox, scratched but clean. Mara joined him for a moment, and neither of them spoke at first. Outside the fence, the concrete looked ordinary. Arthur remembered kneeling there, gathering tools while rich men laughed. He remembered the mirror sliding through the dust. He remembered Julian stepping over it as if it were nothing. Then he looked back into the hangar, where apprentices were now teaching one another how to inspect the hidden places. Mara asked whether he ever got tired of telling the story. Arthur smiled faintly. He said the story was not about him. It was about the warning. Because every machine, every workplace, every family, every life gives warnings before it breaks. Sometimes those warnings come from screens, sometimes from numbers, sometimes from a sound no one else notices, and sometimes they come from a person the room has already decided not to respect. The danger is not only missing the warning. The danger is deciding who is allowed to give one. Arthur picked up his toolbox and turned from the fence. He walked back into Hangar 12 slowly, with the same worn jacket, the same tired knees, and the same careful hands. But he no longer walked like a man waiting to be removed. He walked like someone the truth had finally brought home. So if you ever see someone being dismissed because they look too old, too poor, too quiet, or too ordinary to matter, remember Arthur Vale. Remember the aircraft that warned them 3 times. Remember the billionaire who laughed. Remember the mirror on the concrete. And remember this: what you step over may be the very thing that could have saved you.